Welcome to the first lecture of the course Ocean Politics at the University of Vienna Department of Political Science. My name is Alice Vadrot. I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Political Science of the University of Vienna, and I am really honored to have so many people registered to this course. First of all, I would like to say that I really hope that you are all fine, that your day-to-day work, your teaching practices have reached a stage where you are comfortable with using the digital tools. We ourselves, the teachers, are still struggling, but we do our best to provide you with the best material and teaching that you can get, regardless of the current situation. So, I am a specialist in global environmental politics. My work so far looked at the role of science in international relations. Marine biodiversity protection is a new topic to me, and it's the first time that there is a course on ocean politics at the University of Vienna for bachelor students. So, what are you expecting today? In the following, I will guide you through the aims and objectives of the lecture. Basically reiterate what you can also find in the syllabus that I uploaded to Moodle. Then I would like to introduce you to the topics of the lecture. The ocean as a space to be known. So what do we know scientifically about the ocean? Then the ocean as a space of society and politics. So how is the ocean socially constructed? How was it constructed in history? What role does it play today? And then thirdly, the ocean as a space to be protected. What does ocean protection actually mean? Are there definitions? What kind of measures do we have to respect if we talk about ocean protection? And what are specific challenges that need to be addressed? Then, after this thematic input, I will just briefly go through the different topics and the timeline of the lecture, and then say something about the methods and the assessment in the end, and then just briefly point to the kind of literature that is relevant for the course. Aims and objectives. So as you could see from the syllabus, the objective of the course is to introduce bachelor students to the basic features of ocean politics, with a specific focus on ocean protection, marine political ecology, and the governance of global commons. So global commons, as you may know from other fields of global environmental politics, are conventionally defined as areas and resources that do not fall within the sovereign jurisdiction of states. As you may know, in the case of the ocean, a large portion does not belong to national territory and has thus to be considered as a space that needs to be governed collectively, and which resources may also be termed in the form of a global common, which of course also challenges the protection of these resources. The lecture, as you could also see from the literature, addresses key legal, institutional, and political challenges for ocean protection in the 21st century. So I will provide you with legal knowledge on ocean protection, the institutions that are in place to actually govern the ocean, and the political challenges. And I think, even though I'm a political scientist, we cannot look at ocean governance without looking at the legal and institutional conditions for regulating this space. The starting point of this lecture is the recognition that the ocean is governed by competing interests and competing perspectives. So what does that mean? Competing interests means that states and other actors have always had territorial interests in the oceans, economic interests, military interests, political and scientific interests. And these interests do sometimes, they are in line with each other, and sometimes they exclude each other and challenge ocean protection. Competing perspective means how was and is the ocean perceived by policymakers, by society, and by other actors. So it can be seen as the ocean as a habitat, an ecosystem where species live. Another perspective is the ocean as a resource provider. resources, including oil, including fish, including all other kind of resources such as minerals in the seafloor that are of economic interest to people. Then another perspective on the ocean as a transport surface for shipping goods and people. But then the ocean is also an object of scientific inquiry, of interest for scientists that want to reveal the connections between ecosystems, the kind of species that live in the ocean, and also, for example, how climate change affects the ocean. The topics of the lecture are somehow divided into two main parts. So the first part will introduce students to the historical, legal, political, and institutional aspects of ocean protection. And the second part will go into depth into specific concepts and key principles, such as the common heritage of humankind, the freedom of the seas, benefit sharing. But then we will also discuss treaties, conventions, and organizations that are already in place to govern specific aspects related to the ocean, and then also look at the conflicts that shape how we govern ocean protection in the oceans. In order to enable you to use that knowledge, I will discuss 3 specific cases in the second part of the lecture. The first one is the protection of the deep sea. The second one is the protection of marine biodiversity. And the third one is the protection of the polar marine environment, so of species and ecosystems in the Arctic and the Antarctic, which pose different but also important challenges that need to be addressed. So the ocean as a space to be known. Before I start sharing some knowledge that I have gathered on what mainly other people know about the ocean scientifically, I would like to encourage you to think about, what do I know about the ocean? Do you have knowledge about the ocean? If yes, what? If you think about the ocean, what are the kind of images that pop up in your mind? Do you see beaches? Do you see blue water? What do you see? And what knowledge do you have about the ocean? If I would be in the lecture now, I would just ask you, as I cannot do that, I encourage you to use the time I'm speaking to think about this question. But so far, what is important as a very basic knowledge, and I'm sure most of you know that, is that the ocean covers 71% of the surface of the Earth, and that it contains about 97% of the Earth's water. So we say the ocean, but often people also tend to refer to the oceans, because we have 5 regional oceans: the Arctic, the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and the Southern Ocean. So the Southern Ocean was added in 2000 by the International Hydrographic Organization. The Pacific Ocean is the world's largest ocean, and it covers approximately 160,000 square meters. The low-lying coastal zone is currently home to around 680 million people, so nearly 10% of the global population in 2010, projected to reach more than 1 billion by 2050. So to sum up, we speak actually of oceans. We have 5 regional oceans. The biggest one is the Pacific Ocean, and many people are very dependent on the ocean and at the same time very vulnerable, because they live in coastal zones that are low-lying and may strongly be affected, for example, by the rise of sea level in the near future. What do we know about the ocean? I asked you this question, and surprisingly, or maybe this comes not as a surprise to you, but it came as a surprise to me when I started engaging in this topic, is that we know very little about the ocean. The United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, that will start next year, addresses the lack of knowledge that we have on the ocean. So 260 million square kilometers of deep sea at the moment are in perpetual dark, which means that we don't have any images about these areas of the ocean. And scientists estimate that 91% of ocean species have yet to be classified. So they were not classified in the past. And at that 95% of the ocean still remains underexplored. So 1 million species, that's an estimation that the report draws of the UNESCO Decade of Ocean Science, still needs to be discovered. And all of all, one can say that the knowledge that we have about the ocean is 0.5 to 15%. And 99% of habitable marine areas lack basic biodiversity knowledge for their management, which is an important point, specifically if we ask, how can we protect marine biodiversity? If we do not have the knowledge on what marine biodiversity actually is located in the ocean, how can we protect it? In the last decades, several efforts were made to advance knowledge about the ocean. So despite the fact that I just told you that we know very little about the ocean, scientific knowledge on the ocean has significantly increased. So these are just 3 different initiatives that I would like to present to you, and I invite you to also read through these reports or look at the homepage that these efforts have established to share the knowledge with policymakers, but also the broader audience. So the first one is the Census of Marine Life, the second one, the first global integrated marine assessment, and the third one, the Ocean and Cryosphere in a Changing Climate Report by the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So why am I showing you these reports? They are important because they contributed to the increase of knowledge, but at the same time, they have a very important political mandate, let's say, specifically in the case of the first global integrated marine assessment and the IPCC report, where nation state mandated and requested the knowledge and also adopted the findings that scientists and experts revealed through their work on these text reports. So it's, of course, scientific work, but at the same time, policymakers requested these kind of documents, and they also acknowledged them to be important and to be also guiding their efforts to protect the ocean. I will now tell you a little bit more about these individual initiatives. So the Census of Marine Life was running from 2000 to 2010, and it was the largest global research program on marine biodiversity. So this is insofar interesting because although the economic exploitation of marine resources dates back to prehistorical times and historic documentation has existed since the 3rd century before Christ, on the establishment of systematic collections of marine organisms. So these began only in the 17th and 18th century. So for a long, long time, we didn't have any systematic knowledge on marine species. And what we know today, like the global marine biodiversity investigations, have significantly changed from what they were in the past. So in the past, they depended not only on the availability of expertise, but also on foreign policies of colonial powers of the time. So for those reasons, for these political reasons, the specimens collected from several regions such as the Caribbean, South America and Africa were mostly brought to Europe, where they were described, deposited in museums collections and used for the production of marine biological publications and monographs. So the production of marine biodiversity knowledge is or was deeply dependent on colonial structures, and this also challenged its production and recognition. So these early publications contained descriptions of specific species such as mollusks, crustaceans, fishes, turtles, birds, and mammals. And it is only very, very recently that big and large development of knowledge on marine biodiversity is possible. And it's not just descriptive studies, it's also large-scale multidisciplinary investigation and synthesis of this knowledge. And one really important case, one recent case, is the census of marine life. So in the history of marine biodiversity science, it plays a very important role. So, as I said, it ran from 2000 to 2010, and it's the largest ever worldwide collaboration of marine biologists involving more than 2,700 scientists from more than 80 countries. So it involved 538 field expeditions, and it costed $650 million US. So the census, the results in the end were that they could describe 1,200 new species. So this significantly increased knowledge on marine biodiversity, and it was also a very important contribution to other studies that aim to show that the ocean is challenged by current environmental changes, such as marine biodiversity loss, which is also very well documented in the World Ocean Assessment. So the World Ocean Assessment is a different kind of thing, because it does not involve in itself scientific knowledge production, but it synthesizes existing knowledge on the ocean. So the first World Ocean Assessment is, you can see, is a report on the state of the planet's ocean. It was sanctioned by the United Nations and released in the end of 2015. In the reader that I use for this course, you can find the first 10 to 15 pages of the ocean assessment, so you can see how it looks like. So the assessment was written by a group of experts and involved more than 600 scientists, which were nominated by United Nations member states. So this is also a difference from the census of marine life, where basically everybody could participate, every scientist. So here, nation states nominated scientists that then participated in the assessment. And the findings, and this is, I think, most relevant for you also, is that the oceans carry a capacity, so it's this ability to sustain human activity and the impacts that is near or at its limit, and that urgent action is needed on a global scale to protect what still remains to be protected. A very similar picture is drawn by the IPCC report on the state of the ocean. So the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which produces regular reports on the state of the climate, the global climate, and which was established in 1988 and has produced many reports on climate, has recently, in 2019, published its first report on the state of the ocean. So it was specifically related to the Arctic and the Antarctic and the effects of melting ice. And here I have a quote from the report from page 9. And this is from the summary for policymakers. So these reports are very large reports with a lot of information, but it also includes summary for policymakers that summarize the findings and are also adopted by governments. So what you can see here, this quote was consensually adopted by nation states, agreeing that what is written here is in line with their policies. So here it says, it is virtually certain that the global ocean has warmed unupdated since 1970 and has taken up more than 90% of the excess heat in the climate system. High confidence. So the high confidence here means that there is high confidence among scientists and enough data that supports this statement, and that this is also recognized by states. The next sentence, since 1993, the rate of ocean warming has more than doubled, which is likely. Marine heat waves have very likely doubled in frequency since 1982 and are increasing in intensity, which is supported by data and very high confidence. By absorbing more CO2, the ocean has undergone increasing surface acidification. A loss of oxygen has occurred from the surface to 1,000 meter. So, as you can see from the IPCC report, the ocean is under threat. There are several different reasons why it is under threat. Alice Vadrot, who is a scientist from Oxford University, has already said in 2013 that it is clear that human activities have led to this situation, have led to the intense multiple stresses acting together in many marine ecosystems, as he says. So in his publication that is also in our reader, he says, this is already resulting in changes in the ocean in all regions at an increasing rate and in some cases has resulted in ecosystem collapse. As you can see from the picture at the right, where you see a coral reef that is almost dead, this is one of the very often used pictures to show how ecosystems collapse. So there are three main reasons that Alexander Rogers and his teams point out in this publication. The first one is overexploitation of biotic resources, such as fish, and then the effects of climate change, forming the so-called deadly trio, as he says. And the deadly trio means ocean warming, acidification, and hypoxia anoxia, so meaning that specific areas have too much or not enough oxygen, which leads to the fact that marine life can no longer be sustained in these areas. So this deadly trio that comes from climate change is one of the three main causes of the current situation. And then the third one is pollution. And pollution covers different kinds of pollution. So most obviously plastic may come to your mind, but we talk about chemicals, particles, including microplastics, then waste from residents, industrial waste, from agriculture, then also noise pollution, so ships, specifically big vessels, and they cause noise pollution that also has significant effects on marine mammals, for example, that simply get lost in the ocean because they cannot communicate anymore. And then another form of pollution are invasive organisms. So the ocean is not only a space to be known, a space to be studied, it's also a space of society and politics. In the past, the ocean has had a significance for societies, for humans. It's obvious in the case of food, of fish, that was always an important source of nutrition for many people. But Steinberg, in his text that you can also find in the reader, he is interested in how the ocean was always also socially constructed, and also what kind of economic importance the ocean has had in shaping our society. So the ocean not only as a space where you can extract resources, but as a space that significantly shaped how we as humans live today, but also how our political systems worked, and last but not least, how global order is established. So there are three very important developments that relate to the ocean and to the use of the ocean that significantly shaped world order. And these are ocean navigation, shipping, and fishing. So Steinberg, in his book, he really starts his text by saying that ocean space has had a significance because it established a certain world order. And one of the important features was ocean navigation, which was seen as one out of three key technological revolutions between the 15th and 18th century. So the others, as you can read in his text, were seen as the printing and the artillery, and the third one, navigation. So ocean navigation, and this is the conclusion of one historian, may eventually have led to the imbalance or asymmetry between different parts of the globe that we still see today. Then the second aspect is shipping. So the range, security, and profitability of shipping are the subsequent keys, or were the subsequent keys to European success and to the hegemony of whichever polity that found the best combination of these three, so of range, security, and profitability through shipping. So this again is a very strong argument to say that these technological interventions really also had a significant impact on world order. Sorry. And then the third one, the development of regular harvesting and distant trading of cod stocks of early modern European countries that has changed the world. So the ability to trade between very distant locations and to harvest large amount of fish, which also has created imbalances between different world regions. But the ocean does not only have a very specific place in history. So Steinberg argues that the ocean remains crucial for sustaining contemporary life. So he points to different ways of ocean exploration that sustain our societies today. The first one being global fish catch and shipping. So at that time, global fish catch and total tonnage shipped by the world cargo had increased tenfold after Second World War. Another very important factor is petroleum extraction offshore, which has increased rapidly with the technological possibilities to extract oil in the ocean. Another very important issue that, however, has not yet developed very fast, also because it's still very expensive, is mineral extraction from the seabed. So the extraction of minerals such as gold, copper, and other minerals that are expected to be in the seafloor. And there are already several companies and state actors that have an interest to extract these resources through deep sea mining. This will also be discussed at one of our lectures, because the protection of the seafloor is extremely important, but also challenging because of these economic interests in these resources. Another important factor that shows how important the ocean is still today for economic purposes is tourism, but also the increase of genetic and pharmaceutical research. So the ocean, as you have seen, contains many species that have not yet been studied, that are not classified. So it also contains a lot of marine genetic resources that have not yet been studied, that are not known, and that may reveal specific information that is useful for pharmaceutical industry, but also for the cosmetic industry, and also, of course, for basic research to understand how species that live in the deep ocean, in very cold areas with high pressure survive, may enable us to develop new products for industry. And of course, this economic interest is increasing with the technological availabilities to actually access and study these areas. So Steinberg points to a very famous publication by Costanza and his team from 1997. So Costanza and his team, they tried to estimate the economic value of biodiversity by looking at ecosystem services. So services provided by ecosystems to society for free. And in order to understand the economic contribution of these services, they made a calculation that is still referred to in many books and publications today. So they estimated that the sea provides services to humanity valued at 21 trillion US dollars compared to 12 trillion US dollars by land. So this is also a very interesting number that shows how much worth resources in the sea still are. So in the last decade, the ocean as a space of society has also emerged as an important topic in social science research. And this partly also inspires my work. So Steinberg approaches the ocean through the concept of social constructivism and political economy, as you can read in his book. And he differentiates between different social constructions of the ocean. The first one being the ocean as a space of transport of goods and people. The second one, the ocean as a space of war, a battlefield of geopolitical powers and military security. The third one, the ocean as a space that contains resources to be exploited. And I pointed to some of them: fish, salt, minerals, genetic material, oil, and so on. So Steinberg, he also addresses the issue of ocean protection, and he says that actually it's part of this third construction of the ocean as a space containing resources, because the emergence of the narrative that the ocean should be protected is seen by him as being related to the awareness that an overexploitation of the ocean may lead to a significant decrease of available resources to be extracted. So ocean protection becomes part of a narrative of economic growth, where still the ocean is seen as a space that contains resources. Nevertheless, I would like to point to two other constructions that also will matter in this lecture. The first one being the ocean as a space of scientific inquiry, a space that is systematically mapped, monitored, and represented. And secondly, as a space to be protected. Because in 2001, the debate on ocean protection, the political measures, and the attempts to develop new legal framework was not as progressed as it is today. And also the scientific knowledge wasn't, as you could see from the census of marine life that only started in 2001. So I would argue that we need to extend the social constructions that Steinberg has identified by these two notions: the ocean as a space of scientific inquiry and the ocean as a space to be protected. So the ocean is also a space in need of protection. There are several political and legal issues that need to be addressed if we talk about protection. And I was asked last year by a colleague from the University of Montreal to write a short chapter on ocean protection for a textbook for students. And during my research, I found out how challenging this is, because there is no legal definition on ocean protection. And there is no coherent framework on ocean protection. So in the following, I will provide you with my attempt to define ocean protection in line with the current legal and political debates on how ocean protection could actually be designed in the future. So what does protection mean? And so far, I have not found a definition, but this is a definition that I propose and that should cover the main aspects of ocean protection. So ocean protection, and this is a very important point, covers activities in two types of areas. In areas within and in areas beyond national jurisdiction. And I will later point out what this concretely means. So ocean protection seeks to reduce serious pressures on the marine environment, such as, and as I had said before, overfishing, ocean acidification, climate change, and pollution from the different sources that I had mentioned, such as chemicals, waste, and noise. And the ocean, and this is also what scientists keep telling us, is a complex social ecological system, a dense network of carbon, heat, plankton, and fish that cannot be seen independently from social activities. The cumulative results of our action, or the cumulative effects, as it is also said in the literature, is a serial decline in the ocean's health and resilience. So human activities are rapidly expanding, including to areas where no human activities were known in the past, so deep water fisheries, deep seabed mining, and deep water oil and gas drilling, which may cause tremendous harm to future ecosystems. So the ocean, it is interconnected, and for this reason, extra-regional sources of pollution may exert significant impacts, including in polar areas. So land-based pollution has an effect on the ocean, and pollution that is not produced in specific areas, such as, for example, in the Antarctic, may still have a significant effect on the ecosystems that are found there. So for this reason, ocean protection targets activities detrimental to the marine environment on the ocean and on land. So it's not about only protecting the ocean and establishing measures to protect marine ecosystems, but also to reduce, for example, the kind of human activities that cause harm to the ocean on land, specifically regarding pollution, for example, that comes from rivers and enters then coastal zones. So there is a legal framework in place, and this legal framework also addresses ocean protection in some way. So from a legal perspective, ocean protection is a common concern of humankind. So Harrison, that I cite here, you also find texts that he wrote in the Reader. Article 192 of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, requires states to protect and preserve the marine environment. More than 160 states have signed the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which includes this article and this obligation on states. But UNCLOS is not the only framework to actually ground the obligation to protect the ocean in a legal framework. UNCLOS is complemented by several treaties that cover specific sectors such as fishing. You have the Fish Stock Agreement, and you have conventions under the International Maritime Organization concerning navigation and shipping. But then there are also other multilateral agreements such as the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Convention on Migratory Species, or the Convention of International Trade on Endangered Species that also regulate specific aspects of environmental protection on ocean and on land, but that are still extremely relevant for ocean protection measures. So as you can see here, there are already several intergovernmental bodies, agencies, and institutions established in the United Nations frameworks that address different aspects of ocean governance. So you can see here, you have UNCLOS, you have the FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organizations that specifically deals with fishing and fish stocks. You have UNEP, you have the IMO, the UNESCO. I will not go through this now because we have a lecture on the Law of the Sea on the 30th of April and a lecture on intergovernmental organizations after that, where we can systematically go through these different institutions and look at their mandates, their history, and how they frame ocean protection and also contribute to it. But this is just to show you that there are many different bodies in place that try to regulate ocean protection at the international scale. Nevertheless, there are still legal gaps to protect the ocean, specifically in the high seas, so in these areas beyond national jurisdiction. And in order to address these gaps, in 2018, governments began to negotiate a new legally binding instrument for the protection and sustainable use of marine biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. So they are discussing specific measures to protect the ocean, such as area-based management tools, so tools in place for specific areas and for ensuring protection measures there. But then also marine protected areas, so designating specific areas in the ocean where, for example, no fish at all can be taken, so-called no-take areas, or where other activities such as shipping should be reduced. Then they are also discussing environmental impact assessments. And we will also have a specific session on this topic, so I will also not go deeper into that. But from what you could see so far is that ocean protection is somehow related to the governance of the global commons. So marine resources in areas beyond national jurisdiction, such as biodiversity, marine biodiversity, they belong to the global commons. And the global commons, it's a specific class of international problem because it involves resources that do not fall under sovereign national jurisdiction. And at present, they are regulated differently in different maritime zones. So depending on the zone where you find a specific resource, it is governed differently. So the common heritage of humankind, for instance, it's a principle that you find in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, and we will also have a specific session on that during our lecture, governs activities in the area. So area means the seabed, ocean floor, subsoil beyond the limits of national jurisdiction, but this principle does not govern activities or resources in the water column above this area where the freedom of the high seas applies. So as you can see, the way in which we govern the ocean and divide it in different zones challenges its protection because you have different principles that are applied to these areas. And it makes a difference if you consider a specific resource to be a common good that belongs to everybody, to present and future generation, or if you have the freedom of the high seas principle that allows states to extract resources in these areas because the freedom of the high seas, the mare liberum, is seen as the most important principle to govern these areas and to enable states to have specific activities conducted on the ocean in peace. I have talked a lot about different maritime zones and challenges because of the current legal order. And here, this graph shows you what I mean by this. So the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which was agreed up in 1982, distinguishes between different maritime zones. So we will start from left to right. So left, you see This is the territorial sea, where states have sovereign rights, is sovereign territory. And it extends 12 nautical miles into the ocean. After this, the exclusive economic zone starts. So these are again 200 nautical miles. And then after this, we speak of the high seas. So everything that is beyond 200 nautical miles from the coast of a state is considered to be international waters or high seas, and it includes 94% of the volume of the ocean's water and 64% of marine waters in terms of the surface. So it's a large amount of space that is governed through principles that only apply to the high seas and have no relation to how the territorial seas or the exclusive economic zones are governed. As you can also see from this graph below, is that there are different rights that states have regarding these territories. So territorial sea states have sovereign rights. They also have sovereign rights to the water column and continental shelf. So this means, and I will explain it in the next slide, that there are different rights regarding the water column and the continental shelf, depending on how long the continental shelf is in the case of a specific coastal state. And then you have the area and the high seas where no national rights are granted to nation states. So the high seas are defined by UNCLOS as all parts of the sea that are not included in the exclusive economic zone, in the territorial sea, or in the internal waters of a state. So marine areas beyond national jurisdiction also include the seabed and subsoil beyond the limit of national jurisdiction. In simple terms, the high seas are the water column, whereas the area is the seabed, so the sea floor, one could say. As the legal continental shelf of states can extend beyond the 200 nautical miles limit of the EEZ, in some places the high seas may overlay the legal continental shelf. It is therefore important to bear in mind the distinction between the high seas, the continental shelf, the EEZ, and the area. So this has also led to several disputes. So Turkey, for example, is not a member of UNCLOS because it considers its continental shelf to reach far beyond what UNCLOS would see or would consider to be legitimate. So the exclusive economic zones are also a very specific maritime zone that granted extended rights to coastal states, and it is defined as an area beyond and adjacent to the territorial sea, subject to the specific legal regime established in this part, under which the rights and jurisdiction of the coastal state and the rights and freedoms of other states are governed by the relevant provisions of UNCLOS. So here in baby blue, you can see the exclusive economic zones of coastal states, including the islands, as you can see here. So what does this mean for the protection of the ocean? How do we protect our ocean in light of legal gaps, a complicated institution landscape, conflicting perceptions and interests in the ocean, and scientific uncertainties? I have shown you earlier how little we know about the ocean, and yet we do know that ocean ecosystems are facing significant threats from human activities in the ocean and on land. we also see that there are different interests in the ocean, including different economic interests such as fishing, shipping, deep sea mining, and other forms of the extraction of marine resources. And then the legal framework that is in place is significantly challenged by a lack of enforcement possibilities, a lack of monitoring capacities. So even if you would establish a marine protected area in the high seas, who is in charge of monitoring this area and of enforcing law? And also the different maritime zones that do provide ocean politics with a strong framework, but still are also seen as a threat to protect our oceans. And do we need to see the ocean as a global common? This is a question that I would also like to address in this lecture. How do we govern global commons that are defined as areas and resources that do not fall within sovereign national jurisdiction of a state, if over 90% of the ocean's water volume and over 70% of the surface are not or are considered to be the high seas? It's such a large portion that we need to think more carefully about what it means to govern the ocean as if it would be a global common that belongs to all of us. So, are resources in the ocean, should they be governed with a common heritage of humankind principle that I will also discuss in one of the lectures? If yes, what does this mean for the protection and governance of specific resources, the access to these resources? Should these resources be equally shared? So one very interesting example is marine genetic resources. So at the moment, they do not fall under the common heritage of humankind because they are mainly found in the water column above the area, which means that a pharmaceutical company accessing marine genetic resources either in this territory or in a database where scientists may have put information on that specific genetic resource can use it for economic purposes. But should this change? Should it be seen as common heritage of humankind and thus access to this resource be restricted? So these are all ethical questions that also make it very difficult to find solutions here. So how to address global inequalities? This is a very important point because knowledge, scientific knowledge on the ocean is unequally distributed. The technical capacities to access the ocean as a space is restricted. It's not equally distributed. And also the recognition of the different forms of knowledge plays a role here because traditional and local knowledge that exists on specific species, on ecosystems, on the ocean is not recognized to the same extent as scientific knowledge in the current debate. But then you also have tensions between coastal states and landlocked countries. So if the ocean belongs to all of us, why should coastal states have specific rights and should have more rights than landlocked countries that may also be affected by a changing ocean? So these again are issues that I would like to explore with you in this lecture, and I look very much forward to it. But now let's come to the more practical issues. So this slide shows you the different topics that we will address throughout the lecture. So we will meet again on the 23rd of April and discuss marine political ecology approaches to the ocean. On the 30th of April, we will have a guest speaker, Dr. Thomas Leudel from the Austrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who is also a legal expert and diplomat who has been involved in many negotiations on ocean-related issues, and he will introduce you to the law of the sea and the very specific provisions that you find in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. On the 7th of May, I will go with you through the existing institutional landscape for ocean politics and ocean protection. So we will discuss different international organizations that matter, their mandates, their history, but also the kind of provisions that they have to actually address ocean protection. On the 14th of May, we will address a more ethical and philosophical question, namely, is the ocean a global common? What's the common heritage of humankind principle? How is it integrated in the current law of the sea? What's its implication? And how could it eventually also be expanded to other areas? So here we will also address issues related to seabed mining, because currently minerals in the seabed are considered common heritage of humankind. On the 28th of May, we will start with the topics, the cases that I've selected to discuss ocean protection. And the first one is the protection of the deep sea. So the protection of the deep sea is a challenging issue because access to the deep sea is difficult. It's very far from the coast, it's very deep down. Still, there are economic interests in the deep sea, and specifically in relation to deep sea mining, specific measures to protect this ecosystem need to be in place. And companies that have, for example, an interest in exploring these areas for future exploitation have also to establish measures for environmental impact assessment, for example. Then on the 4th of June, we will discuss marine biodiversity. So marine biodiversity, as I also mentioned in the third part of the lecture, is insofar interesting because there is currently no legal framework in place to protect marine biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. This is partly because when UNCLOS was established, the term didn't even exist. Marine biodiversity was not something that was somehow considered important. Knowledge about ocean species was so limited, it was rather seen as not existing. So the ocean as a desert more than as a very diverse ecosystem for marine life. So the case of marine biodiversity that I will present would also be based on current research that I'm doing. So you will benefit from the research I did with my team in New York at the headquarters of the United Nations, where governments currently negotiate a new treaty to protect marine biodiversity. So then on the 18th, I decided to look into one specific issue with you, which is the protection of the polar marine environment. So it may come a bit as a surprise for you that I selected this topic, but the specificities of the Arctic and the Antarctic make it a very interesting case also in relation to question of ocean protection. So the Arctic being basically ice that is melting, and the Antarctic being a continent with ice on top that is melting, and well, a new continent may then be revealed, is interesting insofar as very different approaches need to be taken in regards of these two areas. So for example, if there will be a new treaty to protect marine biodiversity, the Antarctic or the Arctic may very likely be excluded from this treaty. So this is one of the reasons why I decided to have this as part of this lecture. And then on Tuesday, the 23rd of June, and I apologize for this mistake in the slide, the exam will take place. So I have informed you about the home teaching measures that I have taken. The situation is not easy for nobody of us, and I have tried, as many of my colleagues also do, to establish measures for making it as easy for you as possible. So we use Moodle, all learning material, lectures, the syllabus, etc. You can find everything on Moodle. I will also continue to record my lectures and to make available the slides. Each Thursday I will upload them. I hope that in the future I will be able to also establish online dialogues. So the system that the university has put in place so far enables 100 persons to participate in an online lecture, but not more. So if there is progress regarding these technical issues, I hope that we can have live sessions and you can also directly respond to my lecture. And please do not hesitate to contact us in case of questions or queries. So my colleague Emmanuelle Bourgat from my team, she will always respond if you need some help. As you could also see from the syllabus, there will be a written exam in the end composed of 7 questions. There will be questions on the definition of terms, clarification of principles that I explain in the lecture, comprehension questions, and then in the end also one opinion question where I ask you to respond like in an essay way to a specific question. And on the right side you can see the kind of grades that I have foreseen. So the course uses a reader. The reader contains literature that is relevant for the exam. Not all papers are relevant, but most of them. But I will let you know after each session which papers are specifically relevant for the exam. I hope that a printed version of the reader will be available soon in the faculty shop in the NIC, but again, this is unfortunately not under my power. So with this, I would like to thank you very much for listening to my talk, for your interest in ocean politics. I'm working on ocean issues because I really love the ocean, and the picture that you can see here is a picture that I took during hiking in Cornwall in the UK, and the ocean is not only beautiful, it's a place that is valuable for so many different reasons. And Cornwall has established several measures to actually protect the ocean. So already in the 19th century, the Natural Trust has established measures to actually, they bought land and so they sustained these ecosystems. And it's a beautiful place to do a hike. And I'm very honored that I can talk about ocean issues in a landlocked country, and I hope that I can increase your passion for ocean issues during our lecture. And having said that, I wish you a wonderful day, and stay healthy and see you soon. Bye.